it would seem that no matter what South Africa does, America is simply not satisfied. Have you taken that into cognizance?
Yes, we obviously have to take that into account. But, you know, the thing again with diplomacy and international trade is that we can't sit and lament trade partners.
Can I interrupt you for a moment?
It's a test, I think, of diplomacy. Yes.
I apologize. You would have heard at the Kgalemo Motlanthe Winter Seminar intimations that no matter what it is that we can do as a country, but the last thing we should ever do is to dice or play games with our sovereignty. And it would seem that's the space that the new administration in the US wants to play in. Should we allow for that?
No, we must respect the sovereignty of all states, absolutely. And we must ensure that South Africa isn't, pushed into a corner. I mean, on the one hand, you have to balance our sovereignty and make sure that South Africa can act in its own interest. But on the other hand, you must take into account the fact that South Africa's foreign policy decisions come with real-life consequences. So if you are...
Guys, so the new international relations spokesperson for the Democratic Alliance, Ryan Smith, here arguing with Toli in a really strange set of questions Toli throws at him, but really interesting questions which I think all South Africans need to understand. And also it boils on this whole thing about what I'm beginning to hear, especially as an outsider now. It seems we still have two countries. I'm beginning to hear the presence and the manifestation of two countries in South Africa, where one has a different way of seeing the country, the other has a different way of seeing the country. And this is, I would argue, the DA and its followers and the ANC and its followers. So Ryan Smith is actually of the opinion that, Pax Tao, who is Minister of Trade and I think Competition Industry, I would find a way how they argue to that effect, argues that, this Department of International Relations and Cooperation in South Africa, DIRCO, had been for a long time unable to anticipate these tariffs and actually anticipates the procedures in which it would navigate or should have navigated the reality, all right, of a 30% tariffs in South Africa. I think it's just recently that Pax Tao, or I don't know if it is recently anyway, but we saw a recent announcement by Pax Tao on the effect that, there's going to be an introduction of an export support ministry or something like that to help people who wish to export their products from South Africa in all of that. But anyway, Ryan Smith argues that this kind of policy should have been instigated or instituted for a long time. Let's just quickly listen to Pax Tao break down this alternative in the wake of a 30% tariff blow by Trump to South Africa's economy.
In relation to alternative markets and in anticipation of whatever can happen today or tomorrow, we will be unveiling an export support office throughout the country. So the ability to say exporters currently who are trading in these sets of products that could be affected over the next 24 hours, how can you find alternative markets, which are the countries that we have agreements with, but also what support programs would be able to give. But that office is not just for those who essentially are looking for alternative markets. It becomes an office available to all South African entrepreneurs that are looking to export their products into different markets.
Embassy. Last night we engaged with the United States trade representative in the US also last night, and they were unable to give us a firm indication as to what it is that we need to do now to get to the point of a decision in relation to South Africa. They suggested that, look, maybe present a revised offer, because we had given an offer. When we were in the US, you'd recall, we announced that we've given a framework deal to the US with a set of issues that we thought we should be able to offer them, but also a reciprocal engagement on what we would require from the US side. We haven't had confirmation as to what their stance is so far. The last time they engaged with us, which is formally now 2 weeks ago, was to say, look, we need you to enter into an agreement that allows negotiations to start. We signed on our part. We did not get a signature on the side of the US. And they said, after you get our signatures, the US will also send you a template that you would be able to fill in or work around to be able to make a submission. And we haven't had confirmation of the template itself, let alone the agreement. So we've said to them, but it's very difficult in this situation to say this is the South African position. So last night they said, look, colleagues, reality is that we're at the end of the road. The first is around the corner. It's not worth waiting for the template anymore. Give us a revised offer. Give us an offer that says this is what you offer in the US. Be explicit about what your additional offers are over and above your original offer, and wait and see.
Yeah, so you heard it for yourself. That's Pax Tao, and that's his voice sometimes makes me, I don't know, the way he sounds sometimes makes me feel strange. But anyway, what Ryan Smith is actually arguing, and this is actually to the core of this argument, which I really want us to listen to in this whole interview between Newsroom Toli and Ryan Smith, arguing that, Toli still thinks that, why is it that Ryan Smith still continuously, or probably even the DA, still continuously tries to blame or place the blame on a Pax Tao or the presidency, knowing fully well that regardless of what South Africa does, Donald Trump is poised. He's determined to punish South Africa. Toli is actually arguing that why is it that these analysts do not take this into account in their blame for the presidency or Pax Tao and all of that. And Ryan Smith has a really interesting response. I don't want to spill that, but we're going to watch together to really understand that at the end of the day, what I'm hearing from Ryan Smith is that regardless of the punishment that might be coming from the US or whatever, how the US perceives South Africa, whatever South Africa chooses to do has consequences. And these consequences would be hitting a 60 million worth citizenry, to which if I listen to The Economist, I usually share a lot on this channel, he argues that 11 million are actually unemployed. We have a large portion of that populace in South Africa receiving this grant, so to speak. And so at the end of the day, if South Africa decides to maintain its stance, fight for sovereignty, accept the 30% tariffs, maybe start beginning to build new markets, it would be a really worthy fight for its sovereignty, right? To maintain its stance and fight for its sovereignty. But does South Africa have the right leaders to pursue this kind of path? Because this kind of path will really demand a dogged level of leadership, the doggedness, the discipline. Now that we are struggling with leaders who still cannot, the whole thing with corruption anyway, and for me, this is actually the same also in Nigeria. I'm not just blaming South Africa, but, in Africa, for example, my country, Nigeria, for example, many countries, do we have leaders that are strong and dogged enough to stand the test of time and decide that, no, we won't be corrupt, we are going to have a clean government, we're going to fight for sovereignty? I think it will be on that basis we can begin this fight for sovereignty. Not when we still have leaders who still do not have kind of like clean record, who are still slaves to how much they can steal from the government and all. And this is kind of like the things that make me passionate about leadership in Africa. It's almost as though we still have slaves, as leaders all across the continent. And it really gets the youth really upset. We see the thing with the thing in Kenya at the moment. The youth are really impatient with this kind of leadership, where they think, they really are seeing leaders who do not love the country at heart, but really want to accumulate what they can within the regime or their tenure and to secure a lot of wealth for themselves. And that's a slave-like mentality. So do we have the right leadership to really fight for the sovereignty of South Africa in the wake of this whole Donald Trump's bullish tariff-based negotiations across the board? Or are we still going to enter this fight for sovereignty with these compromised leaders, which we're seeing in South Africa, I would argue, because I see a lot of your comments, but also across the continent? I think this is what this discussion is all about. And I think it's really important that we all listen and understand the lines of the debate between Ryan Smith and Newsroom Toli, so we can understand the two debates that are really determining and defining where South Africa and how South Africa will respond to Donald Trump's tariffs in the wake of the 30% tariff, and I think an extra 10% because of what Trump calls South Africa's alignment to the BRICS bloc's anti-American stance. Let's quickly listen to this interview, Toli and DA's Ryan Smith, and share your thoughts in the comments.
And the Democratic Alliance saying the country's hopes now rest with Minister Pax Tao to find a last-minute deal with the United States. Let's speak to that political party's international relations spokesperson, Ryan Smith, who talks to us tonight. Ryan, good evening to you. Thank you for your time. I just want to start off with something mentioned in your statement released yesterday, and it is that you say, as the DA, you welcome the decision not to retaliate against the 30% tariff threat. Was there ever intimation of that from government at some stage?
Thanks, Tariff, for having me on the show this evening. No, I think the statement that you're referring to is actually from our trade and industry spokesperson, Toby Chance, but I obviously am aware of what was said there.
Yeah.
I don't think, we're not sure what was negotiated in terms of the trade agreement. It is under a non-disclosure agreement at the moment, but even still, the South African government, and certainly Parks Tower, has not been transparent enough with South African industry insofar as what this means going forward. We've got, I think, less than probably about 12 hours now before the tariffs are likely to kick in. Given the time difference, that will be about 6 o'clock tomorrow morning. And aside from the manufacturers and exporters back home in South Africa, there are goods that are on ships currently at sea, and we don't know what is going to happen to any of that at the moment because of the fact that Parks Towers really left the country in the dark on this. So no, we don't have any room for retaliatory measures, certainly against the United States.
Yeah.
But we need to negotiate the best deal possible for South Africa as soon as we can.
You say, even though you are blaming Dow's department of not communicating with South Africans, there is almost a disclaimer there that NDA or not, that's non-disclosure agreements or not. How does the minister and his department get around those non-disclosure agreements?
Well, remember, the non-disclosure agreement comes towards the end of the process, and we've asked for an extension in South Africa on our ability to negotiate a deal with the United States as is. We've now reached the end of the extension, and we still do not have a deal. And so the NDA really has come into play towards the end here. The problem is that from a diplomatic perspective, Durka was supposed to assess the political shifts in the United States and should have been able to preempt what South Africa required going into the Trump presidency and the Trump administration, and knowing that there was an America First agenda that the Republican Party was going to implement. And we should have actually been on the front foot here and been more proactive and preemptive in trying to prepare South Africa for these potential tariffs. We've then gone into the negotiating period. We've asked for an extension. And through this entire period, there has been very little communication from Parks Tower as to what the intention would have been in terms of certain sectors in the industry, what the fallback would likely be, what sort of percentage they were looking at getting tariffs negotiated down to. So even outside of the non-disclosure agreement, there's a lot of information that government could have provided to South African exporters and industry that has been, just left really unanswered. And I think that's the problem here, is that this is not a small matter. It is the difference between industry being able to continue as normal and actually looking at laying off workers and increasing the unemployment queue in South Africa because of negligence on the part of Parks Tower.
Interesting comment that you've just made, that it would have been, or it was, the responsibility of DIRCO, this is the Department of International Relations and Cooperation's failure to anticipate the new administration's political attitude and therefore forewarn of what would come. Am I hearing you correctly there? And if so, what should have DIRCO done differently?
Well, yes, absolutely. Trade and economic diplomacy is a multifaceted agenda. It has to begin with DIRCO, but it also includes departments like trade and industry, and certainly in the South African government's environment, you have to plug in industries such as agriculture, for example. We're one of the world's leading agricultural producers and exporters. So it must be a multifaceted approach in terms of the South African government. In terms of negotiating the tariffs, yes, that rests with Minister Parks Tau and the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition. But in order to negotiate and negate and get the best possible deal, you have to involve other departments. And the crucial point here with DIRCO is that diplomacy really is the art of negotiating the world as it is in the best interests of your country. And if you look at the way that DIRCO has handled the situation in the United States, it really has been negligent. We haven't been able to get an adequate ambassador up and running in the United States to represent South Africa's interest in Washington. We've seen that there's been an issue with Mcebisi Jonas being sent as a special envoy. We still do not have a credible voice in Washington to represent the interests of South African industry. And this has created a problem, and this has been ongoing now for months. So it really is DIRCO and even to a certain extent the presidency's issue that they haven't made strides to really focus on this negotiation. And, you know, the United States is not just another country. It is our second largest trading partner. And the effects of not negotiating a trade deal with urgency with the United States has absolutely catastrophic or potentially catastrophic consequences for South Africa.
Yeah. Well, it's very interesting, the way that the DA is looking at this. Can I then try and transition from what you say are the failures of DIRCO and go to the ANC now? And I'm going to the ANC deliberately because the international relations space, or should we say South African foreign policy, rests with the presidency, right? That's the president's office. And that's what they have said, despite your efforts by the DA to try and get in terms of decision-making there. So the reason I'm going to the ANC, Ryan, is, again, going back to the statement of Toby Chance, the spokesperson on trade and industry, who then says the DA has repeatedly called for an ANC change of heart towards the United States in order to protect our economy and jobs. Do you want to expand on that? Do you understand exactly what Toby Chance was making reference to there? What is this change of heart?
Yes, absolutely. Well, I think what it refers to is it's the fact that South Africa's foreign policy needs to take South Africa's interests into account. We need to be doing what's best for South Africa. And that is really the division between party and state. And the ANC, after 30 years of majority rule, has not been able to remove party political interests from what is the best interest of South Africa as a whole. And so that's what we say, that South Africa's foreign policy, certainly under the ANC, does require a change of heart, because it's not what the ANC wants, it is what is best for South Africa going forward. That is what the responsibility of the South African executive is, and certainly the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation. And what we must realize is that in South Africa's government of national unity context, yes, foreign affairs rests in terms of the constitution with the president, but the president is no longer elected by one single party, but by a plurality of voices in parliament, including that of the DAs. And so it is his responsibility to respect the wishes of the parties that have given him power to execute as the president of the republic. And so in the coalition space, yes, this power is vested with the president. The ANC has certainly kept foreign affairs under an ANC ministry. Both the deputies are ANC, including the parliamentary chairperson. But in the coalition landscape, you must take into account the other voices of the coalition. And the statement of intent makes that very clear. Yeah. It says that we must agree on a certain minimum basic program of priorities that has been set out. The one that is right at the top there is rapid and inclusive economic growth. Now, if we are taking foreign policy decisions based on what the ANC wants and not on what is in the best interest of South Africa, and if these decisions are leading to economic disaster and turmoil, it really is not serving any South African going forward, and is certainly not representative of the voices in the coalition that govern South Africa at a national level.
Ryan, South Africans listening to you and me tonight may be mistaken to think that South Africa has not been taking this matter seriously in terms of placing an offer on the table. One does exist. Parks Tau did table this, is it not true that perhaps we could be looking internally in South Africa and saying, we've done this, we've done that, that is wrong, and failing to recognize that it is the United States, the new administration, that has displayed intransigence here? It would seem that no matter what South Africa does, America is simply not satisfied. Have you taken that into cognizance?
Yes, we obviously have to take that into account. But, you know, the thing again with diplomacy and international trade is that we can't sit and lament the decision of voters in another country and sit and wring our hands over our inability to get what we want from a particular country in black and white, or get 100% of what we want as a particular country. That's where diplomacy comes into play. You have to get what you want being as nice as possible and being as cooperative as possible with your international trade partners.
Can I interrupt you for a moment?
It's a test, I think, of diplomacy. Yes.
I apologize. You would have heard at the Kgalema Motlanthe Winter Seminar intimations that no matter what it is that we can do as a country, but the last thing we should ever do is to dice or play games with our sovereignty. And it would seem that's the space that the new administration in the US wants to play in. Should we allow for that?
No, we must respect the sovereignty of all states, absolutely. And we must ensure that South Africa isn't, pushed into a corner. I mean, on the one hand, you have to balance our sovereignty and make sure that South Africa can act in its own interest. But on the other hand, you must take into account the fact that South Africa's foreign policy decisions come with real-life consequences. So if you are going to position South Africa in a particular way, you must understand that that might potentially come with flack from your trading partners and from countries with far larger economies than ours, and as a result that have a far greater say on the international stage than we do. We must always bear in mind that, yes, South Africa is a sovereign state and we have every right to take the decisions that we determine are correct. Yeah. But again, as I said earlier, those need to be in South Africa's interests, not in the interests of party political concerns that seem to stem from the ANC. At the same time, you need to leverage as best you can the best possible deal on the international stage, given the circumstances of your particular country, respecting your own sovereignty, but obviously being pragmatic about the international system in which you wade. And that really is where the diplomacy comes into play here. And we need to navigate the space as best we can. It's a real test for South African diplomacy, absolutely. But at the moment, it doesn't seem as if the ANC is really delivering here.